Hey everyone, Nick Yuskevich here with Daily Fantasy Winners. We're going to do something a little different here for this episode. It is not a Tee to Green episode, even though it does say Tee to Green here at the top of your screen. Ignore that. This is going to be a March Madness pool advice show as far as some different tips and strategies you can use to help win your bracket pools, whether it's just 10 to 15 of your buddies and you want to have bragging rights or take a few bucks off of them. Maybe you are going to be playing in a bigger bracket pool at like your local country club or bar or something like that, and you've got 100 people, and maybe you're playing with a bunch of people that kind of do know what they're doing and things like that, or at least they're just maybe not necessarily know what they're doing, but they're just more in tune and follow basketball. And we can look at just even some things as far as like if you're going to make a ton of different brackets and do it on like the platforms like ESPN, CBS, and Fox and all that, those kinds of places. As far as like some strategy you can do to try and give yourself the best odds of winning the grand prize and beating all 100 and some thousand or a million people, whatever it is. Like it's a ton of people, obviously. Your odds will be very slim no matter what, because this is a very luck-based oriented thing. But if you want to try and improve your odds there and give yourself the best shot, and you want to have some fun, we'll dive into that a little bit as well. So we'll look at it from a few different perspectives. I will then jump into each region. By no means am I going to go into every single matchup, and I'm not going to be trying to analyze every first round matchup like that. I'm not doing that. There's better people, better places out there to look for that than here. This is just going to be more about applying some of the metrics out there and like the public pick percentages and how to cross reference it versus each other and using it against kind of like the public perception of certain teams, and just kind of looking at some different predictive metrics and things like that, and how it's going to work out. It's more just basic math as opposed to matchup type of stuff. I'll maybe touch a couple things matchup wise here and there, but that's about it. And so it'll mainly be the advice and all that type of stuff and the bracket tips. But and then at the very end, because I do have worked in college sports before and I do a little bit still like in other various capacities, I guess. But and I follow college sports pretty darn closely. Just if you probably noticed on Twitter, I'm going to touch a little bit just on the stuff at the very end as far as like a couple teams that got snubbed, and I will touch on a little bit as far as like how to improve the bracketing process overall. There are a lot of places out there that are writing these kinds of things and saying these different kinds of things. That's fine. I just kind of want to say my 2 cents at the end if you're interested by any chance. But I will spend most of the time here on the bracket advice stuff, which I think is what you're mostly going to be wanting. So we will dive right on into this. So a few things. The first thing before we get into the bracket, just talk about the tips before we start applying it. First thing is make sure the scoring system, you're like aware of it and what the actual scoring system is. I'm going to mainly be attacking this from the perspective of like the generic that points double every single round. Most places do this, not every single place, but there are honestly a ton of different types of types of like scoring systems you could do, and it would be impossible to touch on all of them. But I would just so I'm going to stick with the standard scoring system of that points double every round. Like ESPN does this. I think they start with 10 if I remember right. It goes 10, 20, 40, 80, 120. Or that's not right. 160, 320 is how that would work out. And so yeah, it doubles every round. And so therefore I always say this, that you win your bracket pools or you win these types of things by picking the March Madness champion, or you pick these things by having the most Final Four teams correctly. You do not win this by picking the most first round upsets correctly, or you don't win it by being that guy that picked the upsets, the amount of upsets. So unless you're in a type of thing where seed matters to the amount of points you're doing, I always say this, it's perfectly fine to have an upset in the first round or a few upsets in the first round. You want to have a 12 over a 5 or a couple 12s over 5s, that's fine. You want to do a 13 over a 4 even, that's fine. Even once in a while, I think a 14 over a 3. Like, there was one year Marquette was a 3 seed. This was only like a few years ago. Marquette was a 3 seed. And I actually forget who they were even playing. But Marquette was only like a 3-point favorite in Vegas. And so, because like a lot of these seedings can get really screwed up some years. And so, it's like sometimes I would even say, like, you could do something like that if you really wanted to. But I don't think there's anything this year that resembles, like, there was no spot here I would say a 14 should be a 3 or 15 over a 2 or anything like that. At least that I would be picking. But if you want to do a couple of the other ones, like 4, 13, 5, 12, 6, 11, whatever, that's perfectly fine. I just would make sure you're only doing it for the first round. You don't want to go farther than that. Maybe you want to have a 12, like one of those 11, 12 seeds making the Sweet 16. That's about as far as I would go. As far as the Elite Eight, I wouldn't do it. Definitely not Final Four and all that. so now you're probably thinking like, okay, yes, but there are examples where like George Mason made the Final Four in 2007. Butler was a Gordon Hayward half-court buzzer beater away from beating Duke in the national championship for Butler to beat Duke when they were an 8 or a 9 seed. There was a national championship of 7-seeded UConn with Shabazz Napier when they played against 8-seeded Kentucky with Julius Randle, and where UConn won that. Like, yes, there are examples of this, but the odds of those examples happening are extremely slim. But more importantly, if like even though that like yes these slim things happen, and yes there are going to be like some brackets out there, even on like the 100 and some thousand or the million some brackets that are out there like on the platform of ESPN or whatever, there is a very good chance that even if that person has like that crazy thing that just happens to hit, there is a very good chance that they also pick like a bunch of other like absurd things that aren't going to happen. So like if they just happen to pick, for example, like let's say they picked Butler just because it's like, oh, like this person's just like, oh, I know Butler, they like made the national championship 2 years in a row. Let's pick Butler to go to the Final Four or something like this year, and they're a 10 seed right here. Okay, so if that like somehow hits and gets here, my guess is they're probably also going to say that like, they're also just going to have like, oh, Davidson, Steph Curry, let's have them go to the Elite Eight or something. They're also going to have something like absurd like that. But honestly, even if that one person was like actually smart and they somehow randomly though still picked like one of these like crazy things that ends up hitting, just if that one person or those few people like actually tried to pick a good bracket, it's really hard just based on this event's flipping a bunch of coins because all these games are going to be near coin flips anyways. It would just take a lot of dumb luck for them to catch up to be at the top anyways. So my point is, it is not worth in any way, shape, or form trying to chase and up like one of these double-digit seeds going really far in the field. It's just not worth it. As long as like the scoring system is like the points double and everything like that. So that would be the first thing I would make sure you're aware of. The second thing I would probably take a look at here, and I will dive into what a couple of these columns here now are on the far right side of your screen here, and these are the public percentages on ESPN for every team to make the Final Four here in column T, and then in column U is to win the title. And if you go onto the ESPN's Tournament Challenge, you can actually see what every team is for every single round, starting from the first round all the way through winning the national title. I just pulled off Final Four and national title just to kind of not like the correlation is going to be the exact same, pretty much near the same from the first round through the national title. But I just wanted to pull up the Final Four and national title just to kind of simplify it a little bit. As far as the way this is color coded, this is just by region. Yellow is the East, green is the South, red is the West, and then the blue is the Midwest. So this is just color coded. And these percentages that were as of Monday afternoon. So these numbers have probably changed here a little bit over the last couple of hours or so when I pulled this off. But they probably won't change like a ton. They'll change a little bit, but they won't change a ton. And they'll generally speaking be pretty much the same. And so and they'll probably be the same at all the other platforms. Like ESPN has. They're going to have like a ton of brackets. It's probably the most popular site as far as like playing the bracket pool games, I would think. Maybe Yahoo's up there. I'm not 100% sure, but this will give you a general guidance for all the bracket platforms out there and probably like what your friends are doing, generally speaking. Obviously, the smaller the pool, then it's harder to predict, of course. But I would take a look at the public percentages here. And then what I would do is I would cross-reference it against a predictive metric. My recommendation is just use KenPom because I think it's the best predictive metric out there that's out there for public viewing, essentially. I also think NBAmath.com actually does a really good place, or has become a really good place for this. They do a lot of stuff with NBA analytics. I actually know the guys over there, and I think they do a really good job. But they also do a lot of stuff with college basketball too, as well. And they have good analytics there. And so it's March Madness season, so they're pumping out some information there on that. So check out their good Twitter handle to follow at NBA_math. I should have double checked that. I believe it's at NBA_math. But they're out there. They'll have a bunch of followers. So you'll find them easily. And NBAmath.com is the website. They're putting out good stuff. But anyways, I'm just going to use KenPom though, just because it's one of the most popular ones and it's easy to view. It's right here. I'm going to reference and kind of go back and forth to this a little bit as we look into the different regions. But So we'll take a look at Ken Palm. I wouldn't use BPI. I don't think the BPI, the metrics at the predictive metrics at ESPN are very good, especially the collegiate ones. It's kind of a whole other subject. I just don't think they're very good, so I wouldn't use BPI. Sagarin's okay. I think it's okay to decent. It's not my favorite though. I think Ken Palm's kind of the gold standard, if you will, though, for college basketball, and Ken Pomeroy specifically works on college basketball. If you are completely just new to Ken Palm's website for whatever reason, you have no idea what's going on in college basketball, I'll just point out to you how he has this laid out here on this site right now. The ranking, actually, let me take a step back. This is a predictive metric. This tells you how good these teams essentially are, how they would, and they correlate. They're like nearly the exact same of what Vegas would have. They're not the exact same, but they're very close to what the sports books would have. There are sharps that'll bet against it a little bit and things like that. But for the most part, they're going to line up pretty darn closely to what odds makers would have at the sports books. So this is how the ranking goes here, 1 all the way down to 351. These little tiny numbers here next to the teams here, that's what seed they are in the NCAA tournament. If they're highlighted in red, that means they're in the NCAA tournament. The ones that are not highlighted in red and don't have a number, obviously, to the side of their name, they are in the NIT or the CBI or didn't make any tournament or whatever. And so that's something we can look at. And then I won't dive into a bunch of the Ken Palm's data and everything like that, but I might point out 1 or 2 things and kind of show you how it works and how to use it. But I would take the public pick percentages that I was talking about and cross-reference it against a place like Ken Palm. And the reason why I would do that is you can find a lot of times with teams that are rated in the predictive metrics very well, but they're actually not picked by many people to go very far in the NCAA tournament because they may not be like a blue blood or brand name program type of thing. And on the flip side, you can find some teams that'll be usually these brand name programs that are picked to go far by certain people because of the label that's on their name, but they actually the predictive metrics aren't showing up very well. So you can find things here on both sides of the coin to kind of use to your advantage. It's one of the biggest things I think you can do to gain an edge. And a couple examples I'll just cite were just actually one of each of the last 2 years. If we go back to 2016 Villanova, they won the national title. Before Villanova won that national title, the entire narrative was that Villanova always choked when they got to March Madness. They remember Villanova as a 1 seed losing to NC State as an 8 seed in the second round. They remember Villanova as a 2 seed losing to St. Mary's in the second round, who I believe was a 7 or a 10 seed. I think that was the Dellavedova team, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong on that actually, but in any case, that's what there was. There was this narrative driven that Villanova was that just kind of always choked, or Jay Wright can't coach in big games, all this BS. And then Villanova just blitzes through one of the toughest regions in the bracket that year as a 2 seed. They beat the number 1 overall seed Kansas in the NCAA tournament, or in the Elite Eight of the NCAA tournament that 2 years ago. Then they go to the Final Four. They destroy Oklahoma, the Buddy Hield team. Go to the national championship, win on a buzzer beater against North Carolina. And so Villanova wasn't picked by a ton of people actually in the brackets that year from the public percentage standpoint. But in Ken Palm, they were very much a top team. And actually, I'm just going to pull it up here because I don't remember where they were in Ken Palm. In 2016, they actually ended up being number 1. They might have moved up actually. I don't know if they were at 2 or 3 maybe before the tournament started, because Ken Pomeroy, he does include all games and postseason things here once the season's over. But Villanova ended up finishing number 1, and they were one of the top teams. It was clear that year. But their public percentage wasn't that high. The same thing is true with Gonzaga. If you take a look at 2017, I'm going to pull this up. Gonzaga, the number 1 team in Ken Palm in 2017. They went undefeated. They were undefeated until their last regular season game. Lost to BYU, I believe it was, in their home finale of the regular season. And then they got to the NCAA tournament, still had a 1 seed. And not many people were picking them to make the Final Four. And it was kind of preposterous because they were in the West region, and it was kind of a weakish region. Arizona was the one team that everyone thought that everyone was picking more as the 2 seed. But Arizona didn't even make it that far because I believe they lost to Xavier, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken. Before Xavier got to the Elite Eight to play against Gonzaga. I think I got that right. But in any case, Gonzaga was the number 1 team in Ken Palm, and quite frankly, it's not even close. You take a look at the Ken Palm's rating, it's a 32.05. And then you take a look at Villanova's a 29.88. So I don't know if like Gonzaga would necessarily be like a 2-point favorite over Villanova and a 3 to 4 point favorite over like everybody else, or more than that, obviously, the farther you go down. But it was clear that Gonzaga, by a lot of odds makers, was at least one of the best teams in the country, and Gonzaga wasn't picked by many because everyone thought Mark Few, he can't get his small school to the Final Four. It's like there are a lot of people out there just has this I'll believe it when I see it with like every team until it happens, and it's just not a good like smart way to think about it. It's just not. It doesn't work like that. It's just not going to be very predictive if you just rely on teams that have done it before. Every year is new and different. So that would be one thing I would look at to see, like, for this year's bracket, thinking, okay, who's going to be that? We're going to take a look at a couple of those teams that might fit that category for this year. The last thing I'm going to say as far as tips go before we get into applying some of this for the bracket itself is that if you are making a ton of brackets, like if you're going to make all 10 of them on ESPN, or you're going to make all 10 of them on Fox, or you're going to play on a bunch of different sites and you're going to make dozens or something like that, just depending on how crazy you want to get. My usual advice here is what I would do is I'd find one of these teams that I'm kind of referencing that's rated really highly by the predictive metrics and not high on the public percentage picks. And then I would pick that team to win it in every single one of your brackets. Or I'd even find like a couple, or if you're don't want to stick to one, then pick 2 teams that are going to kind of fit into this mold and pick them to win it all. So that way you're knocking out a high percentage of the people you're competing against that could potentially win like the grand prize. This is mainly for you're making a ton of different brackets and you want to win the grand prize. This isn't so much for winning like your smaller pool type of thing. So this would that would be my advice there. You want to knock out 90+% of the field by picking the correct winner. And then what you also may want to do is you find like 1 or 2 teams that are picked a high percentage to win it all, or a high percentage to make the Final Four, that maybe don't show up quite as well in the predictive metrics, or maybe their public pick percentage is just so high that mathematically it would just make sense to have them always get bounced before like the Final Four. Maybe you want to do that in all your brackets. Have like one team that you're kind of just playing against and say they won't make the Final Four, because that will knock out a bunch of people from being in contention as well to win it all. So this is like, for the daily fantasy people out there that are, watching this, it's like, this is like GPP strategy as far as like if you're making a ton of different brackets. It's like multi-entry. It's the same concept. It's like the same exact thing. And so especially when we're talking about first place pays, or like the top couple places pay out of like 100 and some thousand or 1 million people, whatever it is. So, okay, we are going to move on to the bracket now as soon as I take a sip of water because my voice is going to go. Sorry about that. And so let's start with the, actually before we start with this, I apologize. The one thing I'm also going to point out is what this data is here from columns O through S. I just did this for Ken Palm ratings. And so these are the seed numbers right here, 1 through 16. And over here is the Ken Palm rating of every team that's in the bracket. And you can kind of see what region is strongest or weakest or what areas. And then over here in this gray area right here, I did what the top 4 seeds are, I should have said average. It's actually total, just so ignore average. That's my fault. It's like the top 4 seeds added together, is this line. The top 8 seeds in this line, top 12 in this line, and then all the seeds put together. And so as you can see, if you're looking at the numbers across the board, they're relatively balanced for the most part. This 929 down here for the West is only inflated just because the 16 seeds of North Carolina Central and Texas Southern, they're like the worst 16 seeds, or 2 of the worst by far. Like they're much worse than Radford. Long Island is actually, or LIU Brooklyn, they're kind of more in that category too, I guess. But basically, NC Central and Texas Southern are like much worse than pretty much everybody else in the bracket, and so that's why this number is just inflated. And honestly, it's just a little side tip. Like the winner of this game, North Carolina Central and Xavier right here down here in the West region, that they should be playing. The winner of that game should be playing Virginia. The Charlotte and Nashville host sites are on the same day, and it could feed in just fine the same way. Like I won't get into all the bracketing principle stuff now, but there's long story short, the committee botched this. There was literally no regular season matchups that prevented them from playing in the first round or anything like that. Like I don't know what they were doing. Like Virginia's the #1 overall seed; they should get the worst 16 seed. I know like a 16 seed's never been a 1, and it's extremely likely that that's going to continue on, that it won't happen this year. But just for whatever reason, like I don't know why they botched that, because that's like actually like a decent, like it's like Virginia's like I think like a 20 to 22 point favorite against UMBC, and they would have been like a 27, 28 point favorite against NC Central or Texas Southern, which is kind of like whatever to some people, but Xavier kind of caught a break for whatever reason. So just thought I'd throw that little tidbit in there. Anyways, let's get into the bracket, and we'll start with the South region. And so it's funny we would look at this with Virginia as the top seed, because Virginia actually fits this category very well of a team that just hasn't been able to make the Final Four, like Gonzaga was before, or somewhat like what Villanova was like before. Obviously, Villanova has more history, and they made the Final Four and won the title before, but it was a long time ago. And so it's interesting, though, but because the region they're in, you take a look at teams like Cincinnati and Tennessee down here, those aren't really blue blood programs either, or teams that are going to be super popular. And so when you look over here for Virginia, they're actually the most popular team to win the national title right now. They're the second most popular team to make the Final Four. I did notice that this percentage has been dropping a little bit since I put this up, so it's probably dwindled a little bit, but still Virginia is clearly going to be one of the favorites to win the national title. And so Virginia, even though the narrative has been that, oh, Tony Bennett can't get to the Final Four and Virginia, chokes. It's their slow style of play and all that. Obviously that's nonsense when you take a look at Virginia here in KenPom, pulled 2018 back up. Yes, they have the number 1 rated defense in defensive efficiency by far, and they'd be number 1 in defensive points per game, but whatever. Like, if you take a look at offense, though, they're 21st in offensive efficiency. They don't just have like a mediocre or bad offense or something. They have a really good offense. The reason why their points per game is so low is if you look at ADJT for tempo, they are 351st out of 351 teams in all of college basketball in tempo. They are by far the slowest team in college hoops. So that's why their points per game is always as low as it is. And for the analysts on TV that are still using just the standard old school statistics, like they don't understand that Virginia's offense is actually good, and they have a really good half court offense. And Virginia's defense is just really good, both efficiency wise and points per game wise. And so Virginia absolutely can win the national title, but unfortunately their public pick percentage is really high. So this is where I would say look at where the green is on this. On these two lines over here, and you'll notice there's not a lot of green here below Virginia. And I would look all the way down here to Cincinnati, who is only making the Final Four in 10.4% of ESPN brackets and only being picked to win it all in 1.9% of brackets. And Cincinnati is a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. And if you look at KenPom here, they are number 4 overall in KenPom. Cincinnati is essentially, for probably a lack of a better way of putting it, Cincinnati is a poor man's Virginia. Cincinnati is a very slow-paced tempo team as well. They are 322nd in tempo. They're number 2 in defensive efficiency, and they're 54th in offensive efficiency. I will admit that 54th in offensive efficiency, while that's not terrible, that is a little bit worse than you would like to be picking a team to go extremely far in the tournament, or at least to win it all. But I think Cincinnati would actually be an excellent choice as far as making the Final Four, because they aren't picked to win by many people. And going up against Tennessee right here as a 3 seed, Tennessee's a decent team. I don't think Tennessee's anything super amazing. They're a pretty good team, but I don't see Tennessee being as big of a threat as a couple of the other 3 seeds. And for the most part here, this is a pretty, for all intents and purposes, an easier pocket of 8 teams, if you will, for Cincinnati to get to this Elite 8 spot right here in the part of this region. And so, and if you take a look up here with Virginia, also, while Virginia is the number 1 team rated in KenPom, but because they're picked by so many people, you have Kentucky as the 5 seed and Arizona as the 4 seeds here, who are going to get some love from people. And as you can see, Arizona is easily the highest picked 4 seed. Now, Arizona's a funny team, obviously, this year because of all the stuff that they've had going on off the court with the FBI stuff. And so they haven't really had everybody, on the court together at the same time at different points in the season and all that. The one thing I will say that, so they're a little bit tough to judge. And if you do take a look at KenPom, Arizona is actually 21st in KenPom. So that would actually be equivalent to being the best 6 seed if you went straight by predictive metrics here, according to KenPom's ratings. And so Arizona is actually a weak 4 seed. And Kentucky at a 5 seed. Kentucky is 18th in KenPom, and that is on point with being a 5 seed. And so the way I would say, so the bottom line here is the way I'd look at it is that Arizona does have a lot of, they have DeAndre Ayton, they've got a lot of the NBA talent. Kentucky obviously has talent as well. I would just say, though, Virginia's chances of getting bounced before the Elite Eight are much stronger because of Arizona and Kentucky more than Cincinnati's, just because Cincinnati is that good, and I don't think they're going to get a ton of huge competition actually before they even get to the Elite Eight. And I know Cincinnati really hasn't done well in the NCAA tournament in the past, but that's why the public pick percentage of them is so low. And the KenPom rating loves them. And so I would say Cincinnati is a great pick to, at minimum, get to the Elite Eight. And I would just say I would honestly take them to get to the Final Four because I feel way better about Cincinnati's chances getting to the Elite Eight than Virginia, Kentucky, or Arizona, no matter which route you go there. If you want to fade Virginia in this high percentage area, I think it's a perfectly fine option. I will just say, though, it's not my favorite thing since they're the number 1 team in KenPom, but just because the public percentage thing is that high, I think it's a nice spot because Cincinnati versus Virginia, it would be a very low scoring game because they're both very slow tempo teams, and Cincinnati is almost rated as highly as Virginia. I think they are. Cincinnati is 27 and Virginia is 32.15. So Virginia, according to KenPom, should be about a 5-point favorite on a neutral floor, approximately. And so, anyway, so that's one thing I would look at for that region. As far as Arizona goes on the 4 seed thing, they're just a tough team to rate because they've been so inconsistent with the way the off the court has happened. So that KenPom rating of 21. Maybe it's accurate, maybe it's not quite as accurate because of the stuff, and DeAndre Ayton is playing incredibly well over the last few weeks and has been playing insanely well since this FBI stuff really picked up, it seemed like, with the stuff in the media over the last couple of weeks or whatever it is. But I probably wouldn't pick Arizona to go to the Final Four, probably because that is going to be a trendy pick. Because it's like everyone's going to pick Virginia or probably pick Arizona. There's a reason why Arizona is picked by more people than Cincinnati to make the Final Four. It's based on the NBA talent, supposedly, and at least with DeAndre Ayton, it's true. And it's based on the past history in Arizona being more of a blue blood program. So Cincinnati, I think, is a clear path. So we'll move on from the South region and take a look at the East region here on the right. The East region is actually pretty similar to the South region. If you take a look here, if you just take a look at the seeds here, just in the top 4, you'll notice the seeds between the South and the East and KenPom ratings are all very similar. 1 through 4, 1 through 5 isn't even that much different, but 6 seed stronger with Florida, and then the 7 seed with Arkansas is a little bit worse and whatever. But still very similar in that Villanova is getting a ton of love. And so, and Villanova is the number 2 rated team in KenPom. So the top 2 seeds in KenPom are the top 2 seeds in the NCAA tournament, and they are the top 2 in public pick percentage. It actually doesn't work like that very often, but that is what we have this year. And this is a very similar thing where I actually like Purdue quite a bit here to at least get to the Elite Eight, and I think they have a great shot to make the Final Four. This is a Purdue team that a lot of people thought was the best team in the country, actually, by the end of January, beginning of February. And then Purdue lost 3 straight games. They lost to Ohio State, Michigan State, and at Wisconsin. Purdue lost. All those games were extremely close games. The loss to Michigan State basically came on a buzzer beater. Wisconsin was a very close game where Purdue just could not make a 3. It was on the road. It was a late night Thursday night game. Purdue it was just one of those games where they couldn't make a shot for some reason. I think and then Isaac Haas was kind of bailing them out late to get him, to try and get him the win. But it was a very close game. And then Ohio State got an offensive rebound late in the game against Purdue and won by 1. I think it was 1 or 2 points against Purdue. So it was a bunch of close losses. Purdue then beat Penn State. They won their last regular season game. I think it was against Minnesota. And then they went through the Big Ten tournament fine until the championship. Went up against a really good and hot Michigan team, and then Purdue couldn't make a 3 again. And that's true with any team. Like most college games are decided by the 3-point shot, or just huge discrepancy in fouls with free throws in the bonus. Like those are the two ways. Like almost every college basketball game get decided. It's usually those two things. And so Purdue just kind of ran ice cold there a little bit on their 3-ball, but Purdue, again, they have one of the best teams in the country. If you do take a look at them on KenPom, they are 5th. They are 2nd in offensive efficiency. They are 29th in defensive efficiency. 29th, it's still pretty good. It's not elite. That regressed a little bit down the stretch of the year. But honestly, Purdue ran more into just some hot 3-point shooting more than anything. I think that why that number came down a little bit as opposed to earlier in the year. And so I do like Purdue just because I don't think they're going to get a huge challenge from Arkansas or Butler here. I think that's a pretty easy path for Purdue to the Sweet 16. Florida is a super bipolar team. They've lost to some bad teams, but they've also beaten some really good ones as well. They had like 9 quad 1 wins, I think it was, by the end of the year. But they also capable of losing to just about anybody. So a little bit inconsistent, but I would still say Purdue's easily the better team. And Texas Tech, I don't know. Texas Tech, they're good. They're a pretty good, solid team, but also at the same time, like they're probably. I still think they're more like a 4 seed. They've been struggling a lot more lately down the stretch, down toward the later part of the season, and so I don't know. That's just my 2 cents. I know that's not really much analysis, but like as far as like in comparison to some of the other ratings of the other teams. What is it? Texas Tech is the 12. They are the worst. They're the worst 3 seed of the 3 seeds, and then the 20 seed or the 20 ranked. Where is it? Wichita State is up here at the 4 seed. Wichita State is the worst rated 4th seed in there, and so I don't know. I feel like the competition there for Purdue potentially isn't as strong. As it will be in some of the other regions for a couple of these 1s and 2s. So I like Purdue, and Purdue's public percentage picks, as you can see over here, 17.8% here to make the Final Four. That is the 2nd lowest of the 2 seeds, and only 2.8% to win it all. And Purdue's the number 5 rated team in KenPom. So I think Purdue and Cincinnati are both pretty good options here if you want to go against Villanova and Virginia, just because the 2 seeds are very strong in that region by the predictive metrics. Okay, let's move on to let's go to the West region. And this region is completely different. So Xavier is, they deserved the 4th number 1 seed in my opinion. But as far as like how good they actually are, they are not that good. They're not as a top 4 team. Kansas is a little bit similar in the Midwest region. I'll just point this out now with KenPom, and you'll see what I mean. Pulling up KenPom, Kansas is 9th. And Xavier is 14th. And one of the things you can look at that will basically show why like some of these teams are more deserving to be rated that or to be seeded that highly, but they're actually not that good, is you want to take a look at the luck factor, the luck rating column here on KenPom. And basically what this will tell you is if a team has ran really well in close games or ran really poorly in close games. If you have a rating of if you're rated like 1st or 2nd or something, that means you've been really good in close games. And if you're like 350th or 351st, you're like the worst luck team ever, like in close games. I do think there are other things that go into the luck rating. I think there's something having to do with like maybe outside shooting that's incorporated into it. I'm not sure if it's 100% close games, but essentially Pomeroy, a very intelligent person and very good with statistics and metrics. And so I would trust this luck rating. And so if you do take a look at Kansas' luck rating, they are 50th. They are definitely a team that's on the lucky side at a plus 0.6 or a 0.060. If you look at Xavier's here, they are 9th at a plus 0.109. So they are just 2 teams that have played really well in close games. That's usually something that's not sustainable. Close game, by contrary to what some analysts will tell you, close game luck will not be sustainable over time. Xavier was actually even better than 9th until they lost in overtime to Providence in the semifinals of the Big East tournament. And so in any case, so Xavier is a team that is not as good as their 1 seed would indicate. And if you actually look at the West region here in this column right here, Xavier right here 14th. Number 7 is North Carolina. They're here. Number 10 is Michigan. And then number 8 here is Gonzaga. So you can see the seeds are all kind of out of order here in the West region, which is not usually... this is a common thing in the West region. The West region always seems to get screwed because there aren't as many teams out west, and teams get shipped out there kind of out of order. Not out of order, but they just geographically and they geographically don't fit, and so it just sometimes gets weird with the seeding and the bracketing and all that type of stuff. And so, not worth getting into, but this is a common thing that happens. And so, but by contrast, you'll see down here by the 5 and 6 seeds are much stronger in the West region as well, here at 15th and 17th. So there's great depth in this West region. It's just there's none of the top tier teams, if you will, other than maybe North Carolina, who are some are seen by Blue Bloods. So I'm going to scroll down here so you guys can actually see it now. There we go. And so, anyways, taking a look at this, I think Gonzaga probably fits the best. Is the best fit here as far as making the Final Four, who's a lower percentage pick. Gonzaga is still, whoops, wrong thing. Gonzaga, as far as the public percentage picks, they are 11.9% to make the Final Four and 1.7% to win it all. And in KenPom, they are rated 8. So Gonzaga getting a very good KenPom rating again. And so their percentages as far as making the Final Four and winning it all are a little bit higher than what they would normally be had Gonzaga not done what they did last year. But still, these percentages are pretty low for a number 4 seeded team. And the other couple things I like with Gonzaga is, first of all, Xavier is like I said, they're the worst rated 1 seed easily. And then secondly, Gonzaga has a really nice home court advantage out here in Boise. They're going to have a huge home court advantage because Gonzaga's not that in Spokane. That's not that far from Boise. And obviously UNC Greensboro, that's a very long trip. Ohio State will have a very long trip, and I wouldn't be too worried about South Dakota State if Gonzaga does end up having to play them in the round of 32. And Gonzaga would still have a good home court advantage there anyways. I mean, South Dakota State's not exactly a short drive over to Boise. So in any case, so I think Gonzaga has a great path. They have the great metrics. Their public percentage pick is not too high. I think they're a nice spot to at least make the Elite 8. They're a slightly trendy pick, but they're not horribly trendy. And as far as Missouri with Michael Porter, I have no idea if they're I doubt that they're going to make a huge run with their. That's tough when someone who has not played college ball and he has just came back for 1 game. I am just incorporating him. I am sure Michael Porter is very good, and I wish him nothing but success down the road. But I would not buy into anything Missouri's going to be the quality of a 2 seed just because Michael Porter's back. I just would not buy into that. The odds makers have this Missouri-Florida State game as a pick 'em or a 1-point favorite to one side or the other. So wouldn't worry about that. On the bottom half of this bracket's interesting. North Carolina and Michigan are both very good. And the way I would break this down is I'll just say this right now. I think Gonzaga is your best bet here. Carolina, I think, has a cakewalk to the Sweet 16. Texas A&M and Providence. Texas A&M, like Florida, is a very bipolar team. And I apologize for using the term bipolar. I should not be doing that. They're just they're very inconsistent. And Providence is a team that, while some people fell in love with them and Cartwright with all the shots he was making in the Big East tournament, Providence in KenPom actually is all the way down at 63rd right here. So Providence is actually not a very good a well-rated team, and they're 20th in luck, actually. So you'll get that. So I think Carolina's got a pretty good path here to the Sweet 16. Houston and San Diego State, quite frankly, are both dangerous for Michigan, but I still think Michigan will get through just fine. And between Michigan and North Carolina, I think you're splitting hairs here. It kind of drives me nuts. North Carolina I'm honestly kind of anti-North Carolina every year just because their half-court offense just drives me nuts when I watch them. It's not. I just don't think their half-court offense is very good, but they have such great talent, and they offensive rebound so well, and they get to the free throw line, and they score in transition so well. They just do so many other things well that it's they end up doing well in the NCAA tournament. But it's just their half-court offense and their three-point shooting just it seems like it's never any good. And so I seem to be more anti-North Carolina than most people. So I lean toward Michigan just because Michigan's defensive efficiency is amazing, and Michigan, I love the way they play offense with John Beilein, but I think either team is fine. North Carolina is a higher percentage pick team than Michigan, I believe. UNC, 35.5% to make the Final Four. That is really high. So actually, I'd probably maybe lean against Carolina and making the Final Four. Michigan is about half of that at 18.3, and then you get the same about half the amount to win it all. And so I would be picking probably Michigan or Gonzaga probably to win it all here. I would even say, and there's a part of me that even says you could go with Xavier, but the problem is Xavier is still a 1 seed, and enough people are picking them to make the Final Four at 25%. That's still pretty high. And I wouldn't be picking Xavier to win it all just because I don't think they're that good. So Gonzaga and Michigan are probably your 2 best bets here as far as a good path to make it, but or a good path just as far as their chances to make the Final Four. I do think Gonzaga is a little bit better than Michigan, though, just because they don't have North Carolina on their side of the bracket. But my voice is going. 1 second here, and we'll get to the Midwest. And the Midwest here is fascinating because we have Kansas, Duke, and Michigan State, 9, 3, and 6th in KenPom up here. And then you'll see there is a big drop-off with 16th and 19th. And honestly, if you take a look here at Auburn, the 4th seed, that's 16th ranking in KenPom for Auburn being the 4th seed. That's misleading a little bit, actually, because Auburn is battling a bunch of injuries right now. So they're not playing like the 16th best team in the country, and there actually is a legitimate reason for that. So Auburn is definitely a pretty bad 4 seed. And even though the resume says they're probably even a 3 seed, like it's just they're playing more like probably like a 6 seed or something like that. I don't know exactly, but somewhere like a 6 seed probably. Clemson is a fine 5 seed. I feel like some people are sleeping on them a little bit just as far as how good they actually are. The problem is they get New Mexico State, which is like the best like 12 seed of the 4, New Mexico State or Davidson, and so that's kind of like a bad deal for Clemson. And Clemson has to go all the way to San Diego, and New Mexico State's a little bit closer to San Diego. Not that it's like a short drive or anything, but in any case, I would just say though right now, Kansas, Duke, and Michigan State by far have the best chance to be making the Final Four in this region. The seeds definitely represent it. And unfortunately, the public pick percentage is represented too. This is the blue here for the Midwest, and you can see Kansas, Duke, Michigan State in some order here, making the Final Four, winning the title, all very high. So what I would do if you are making one bracket, is I would you just pick one of those 3 teams that you like the most, whatever your reasoning is. I think Duke's the best of the 3. They are received the highest, but I mean, not trying to be chalky, but I do think Duke's the best of the 3. But I would pick one of those 3 teams to make the Final Four. Maybe you want to pick them to win the championship or win the Final Four game to get to the championship. I would not pick this team though to win the national title, just because they are almost definitely likely going to play 1, if not 2. Gauntlet games, if you will, just to get to the Final Four, unlike a couple of the other teams with that potential. And so it's just a little bit of a tougher path than you would suggest, and it's just going to be tougher to pick the right team in this region. Like, just so if you are picking Duke, let's say, and they lose to Kansas in the Elite Eight, like, yeah, it's going to cost you some points there a little bit, but it's not going to like end your bracket if you're just off by 1 there, and you're not losing like a ton of points or anything like that, unless they go on all the way to win it all. But hopefully that made sense. Sorry, my voice is going a little bit. So I would just pick one of the 3 teams, and I would not pick them to win it all. Have them go to the Final Four, maybe the national championship game, but not win the national championship. So that is pretty much it as far as looking at at all the regions. If there's anything else I want to touch on here, I don't think so. Yeah, I think we're good here as far as that. As far as all that goes. As far as just a few like kind of cool matchups, I would just say if you want some trendy picks that I do like, or I don't want to say trendy picks, just picks I like in general. My favorite 12s over 5s are Davidson over Kentucky and New Mexico State over Clemson. Part of that is because it's Vegas, the odds makers of where they have it, but there are a couple other reasons. Davidson is one of the toughest teams to prepare for. They have a veteran head coach who has an offense that basically where everybody just runs around constantly. It's more obviously specific than that, but they are constantly in motion. And Dan Hurley, who is the coach of Rhode Island, has said that Davidson is by far the toughest team to prepare for that he's had to deal with because their offense is so unique and they space really well. They're always constantly in motion, and they're just a difficult team to prepare for. And Kentucky, while they obviously have a good amount of talent, this is not, I would say, an elite Kentucky team. They don't really have like one of those top lottery picks on this team. And also that they are a very young team. They have a lot of freshmen, and so it could be tough for them to kind of learn here a new team with just a completely unique style. I could see that being tough for Kentucky defensively potentially there. And Davidson's a really good three-point shooting team, or they usually are a really good three-point shooting team and free throw shooting team. So odds-wise, Davidson's a nice bet over Kentucky, and then also New Mexico State over Clemson. New Mexico State's head coach Chris Jans. He is a really good coach. I went to Bowling Green, and he used to coach at Bowling Green. He got fired for some inappropriate behavior at a bar. Maybe there were some other things, but at least there was that. He is a very good coach. He was actually rebuilding the Bowling Green basketball program really well when he was there. Unfortunately, he had to go, but he's doing a great job with New Mexico State. The Ken Palm ratings really like New Mexico State. If you look at the 12 seeds, we're looking here 43 and 55 for those two. 43 is Davidson, and 55 is New Mexico State. I'm actually surprised New Mexico State isn't a little stronger than that. But so this would be the two 12s I like over 5s the most. As far as 13s over 4, I actually like Marshall over Wichita State. Marshall over Greg Marshall. That would be one. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen or it's likely to happen, but if there is one, I would do that. If you don't know anything about Marshall, their head coach is Mike D'Antoni's brother. His name, oh my God, what is his name? Oh my goodness, I'm forgetting. Mike D'Antoni's brother coaches him. I can't believe I'm not remembering his first name, but he is really into analytics, and he does a lot of things similar to what Mike D'Antoni does as far as like the spacing and playing downhill and not playing inside out and everything like that. And he got asked this question in the postgame of the Conference USA tournament, and he went on this like analytics like discussion / rant, and he's got a great sense of humor and everything. And it's just I think they're a fun team to root for. They've been playing really well. They've improved dramatically over the course of this season, believe it or not. And this is a Wichita State team that is seeded, or in Ken Palm, I should say, not seeded. They are ranked in Ken Palm 20th, so they're actually more like a 5 seed. So I think Marshall over Wichita State would be an option as a 13 over a 4. Buffalo is a pretty good 13 seed, although I have a hard time picking them over a team with Arizona with DeAndre Ayton playing the way they are. I feel we're early in the year because Arizona lost some like questionable games. Like Arizona lost to Western Kentucky early on in the year, but I don't know. I probably wouldn't do the Buffalo over Arizona one. That's going to be a little tougher, I think. Would definitely not be taking UNC Greensboro. If there's 113, I would not take. It's UNC Greensboro. Charleston over Auburn. Charleston's a little bit on the weaker side of the 13 seeds. Having said that, Auburn is definitely the weakest of the 4 seeds, in my opinion. So I do think that is an option if you wanted to kind of get, you want to get it fun there. You could pick Charleston to win that game as far as a 4-13. But it would be, I think Marshall's probably the best bet, though, even though it is a great Marshall Wichita State team that's tough to pick against in the NCAA tournament. But Marshall will be my pick there. No 14s over 3s, nothing like that, 15s over 2s. I'll just say this, Penn as a 16 seed is an absolute joke for the people that really care about this. So Kansas is not really the quality of a 1 seed. They're more like the bottom end 2 seed, top 3 seed. And Penn is more like a borderline 14 to 15 seed. So if there is going to be a spot where a 16 beats a 1, this is where it's going to be for the first time ever. But I'm not expecting it'll happen. I think Penn is like a 13 or 14 point underdog, which is pretty low for a 16 versus a 1. So unlikely, but it is possible. And there's a reason why there are a few people out there saying, hey, it's possible. Like there's kind of a reason for it. But don't be picking that in your bracket. Again, don't try and be a hero there. Just enjoy it if it happens. Okay, that's pretty much it as far as like looking at some matchup stuff. I just want to touch on a couple things here and then I'll wrap up. I'm done with all the bracketing advice stuff. This is just more as far as like the seeding and how to fix the bracket and stuff. So first thing is first, as far as the seeding goes, this is actually not in terms of who's in and out. That I have issues with. But as far as the seedings and where everybody's like seated in terms of like just the number, the seed number they got, maybe not necessarily location or who they have to play and all this type of stuff, but just the seed number, it's about as good of a job as I've seen the committee do. If you go look at the odds right now, nearly every 8-9 game and 7-10 game is a coin flip. The only one that's not really exactly a coin flip is Texas A&M and Providence. And even there, I think A&M's only like a 4-point favorite or 4.5-point favorite. Like, it's not bad. It's still close enough to a coin flip. That usually, sometimes you'll find some of these games where like the 9 seeds favored by like 6 or something, or like the 10 seeds favored by 4 over the 7 seed. You don't have that this year. And in every situation, like the 6 seed, the 5 seed, the 4 seed, et cetera, all the way up to 1, they are favored over the double-digit seed. And we have seen instances where, like last year, Minnesota was a 5 seed, Middle Tennessee was a 12 seed. It was a pick'em game. And Middle Tennessee might have even been like a 1-point favorite by the time the opening tip happened. So you've seen some really bad seedings. So as far as like how good teams actually are, the seeding is about as good as it's been in a long time. And if you look at the resumes and think more in terms along the lines of what seed does this team deserve, almost all of it I think is actually pretty good. I have a bunch of slight disagreements. Like, yeah, I think, one example is West Virginia is a 5 and Texas Tech's a 3. That makes no sense. I thought they were both 4 seeds. They are very similar resumes. That's the short version. But for some reason, they elected to. For some reason, Texas Tech got a 3 and West Virginia got a 5. I don't know why. There's slight things there, but for the most part, I don't have any like huge disagreements. The only one I would say I don't like is Alabama getting a 9 seed. They have 15 losses, and they also had 3 quadrant 3 losses. Like a lot of people were raving about Alabama's quadrant 1 wins and quad 2 wins, and that's fine because they did have a lot of them, like Oklahoma and Arizona State. Like there were some teams like that stacked up the quad 1 wins and everything like that because of the conference they played in. The problem was Alabama had 15 losses and they had 3 quadrant 3 losses, and so I thought they were more deserving. If they were going to get in, they should be at least in the play-in game or just even miss the NCAA tournament because 15 losses is so many. Even if you look at the KenPom rating, like sometimes you get these teams like on KenPom where these teams that make the tournament, that they'll at least be like a top 25 team in KenPom, and it's like, okay, they've had a bunch of terrible close game luck loss, like they've had a bunch of losses in close games, and so that's what inflated the losses, but all their losses are against really good teams, so it doesn't matter. If you take a look here at KenPom, Alabama's 51st. And their luck rating is actually pretty much dead even. It's 0. They weren't like lucky or unlucky at all. They got what they deserved in their 19-15 record, and they're the 51st best team. And so I don't know, like 9 seed. That was kind of nonsense to me. If they're going to get in, should have been play-in game, or they should have been left out. That's my only huge gripe in seeding. Actually, that's not true. A couple other gripes in seeding. St. Bonaventure is an 11 seed. That's absolutely preposterous. KenPom does have St. Bonaventure rated really lowly. Down here at 69th. I understand St. Bonaventure isn't one of like the top like at large teams, and I'm not suggesting they should have been like a 5 seed or some crazy thing. But resume wise and the way the committee is supposed to do it in terms of valuing these top wins, it seems like they just completely dismissed it against St. Bonaventure. They should have been an 8-9 seed, maybe a 10 seed at the absolute worst. They should not have been stuck to and forced to play in the play-in game. That was wrong in my opinion. So those would be the 2 biggest gripes I have, and then on top of Penn being a 16 seed, that's absurd. As far as who is in and who is out, the biggest gripe by far, and I'm going to break this down into 2 separate categories. I want to break this into the first category of the way the selection committee is supposed to do their job and the way they've historically done it, and who got snubbed and who didn't, and then I'm going to say how I would have the committee do it, and then I'll talk about it from that standpoint. I hope that makes sense. So the first thing I would look at is how the committee usually does these things and how they normally do it and apply like the top quadrant 1 wins or the top 50 wins and all this type of stuff. And they value more about who you beat and who you schedule versus like necessarily like, win-loss and valuing like, KenPom ratings, all that type of stuff. My biggest gripe here is USC being left out and Syracuse being put in. And I'll show you what I mean by this. If you look at this, this is off here. I need to recenter this. Give me 1 second here, and I will recenter this so you guys can see it on your screen. Sorry about that. There we go. So if you take a look here on the screen, this is USC and Syracuse, and this is the RPI data that the committee uses to look at. So if you see here, USC is 34th in KenPom, Syracuse is 45th. Syracuse has 2 fewer losses and 3 more, or excuse me, USC has 2 fewer losses and 3 more wins at 23 and 11, and Syracuse here at 20 and 13. USC's strength of schedule is 39th. Syracuse's is 19th. USC is a slightly worse strength of schedule. It's not that much worse. Like usually when you find these differences in strength of schedule where the committee really weighs that bit much more substantially is when you see a team like top 20 versus like being like, 80th to 100th or something. There's usually like a bigger gap than like 50 spots or something like that is where you usually see like the win-loss record more forgiven based upon the strength of schedule. So the strength of schedule is close enough to being the same. Scrolling over here, this is home, road, and neutral wins right here. The committee said themselves that they were valuing road and neutral games a lot more this year and really prioritizing those. USC went 6-5 in road games. Syracuse went 4-6. USC went 5-2 in neutral games, and Syracuse went 2-2 in neutral games. USC has the upper hand. If you look at the quad 1 wins, they both had 4, USC with 2 fewer losses, whatever, but they both had 4 quad 1 wins. USC goes 5-4 in quad 2, Syracuse goes 3-3. Quad 3, USC 8-0, Syracuse 8-2, so Syracuse had 2 bad losses there. And then quad 4, Syracuse went 5-0, and USC did go 6-1. So in most of the time, you would think like logically, like quad 3 and quad 4 are both, those are really bad losses. So like they're kind of grouped together. So USC had 1 fewer bad loss. They were better in quad 2. The same amount of quad 1 wins, but they actually had a better record in quad 1. They were better in road and neutral games. They had a better record, and the strength of schedule was, for all intents and purposes, like very close. Like, there's no reason why USC should be behind Syracuse. The one thing that I heard from the committee of why basically USC didn't get in was because they'd only be one NCAA tournament team, and that was New Mexico State, who is a very good team, but they would not have gotten in without the automatic berth. The problem that I have with that is if you are going to value and go into these quadrant systems of quad 1 and quad 2, or you in the past always looked at top 25 or top 50 or top 75 wins, saying you have to beat like a certain amount of NCAA tournament teams, that's arbitrary also. Like, these are all arbitrary cutoffs. And so I feel like USC got a complete raw end of the deal of just saying like, oh, USC only beat one NCAA tournament team. And they would have beaten 2. It had like Middle Tennessee made the NCAA tournament because they were one team that got snubbed and just left out. And there's a reason why USC has 4 quad 1 wins. They won a bunch of the road games against teams that just missed the NCAA tournament, like a lot of the mid-tier teams in the Pac-12 and a couple of those neutral site games. And so I thought it was a completely raw deal on USC in comparison to Syracuse because USC is better pretty much in every single way here in the RPI. And then even if you do look here at KenPom, USC is 40th and Syracuse, where are you, Syracuse? Why can't I find Syracuse on KenPom? Oh, they're there, 54th. USC is rated higher in KenPom. So like every single thing said USC should have been in over Syracuse. It just makes no sense other than just like, oh, USC like didn't like won like 1 or 2 fewer games against NCAA tournament teams. Like that's preposterous. So and then as far as the teams that got snubbed, well, actually, you know what, before I do that, I actually also want to mention here, Notre Dame being the first team left out of the tournament. We found that out actually after the bracket was revealed that Notre Dame was the team that was knocked out of the tournament due to Davidson winning the Atlantic 10 tournament. That's Notre Dame. That's preposterous, the whole injury thing. Okay, we have to go on a little bit of a rant with this one. With everyone was talking about Notre Dame with Bonzi Colson being out and the injuries and stuff like that. The biggest issue I have with this, with injuries, is there are so many teams that have injury situations and teams with good players that go through injury situations. You can't specifically cite Notre Dame or a couple of the big brand name programs that do this and not cite every school and being able to do it. That's just, it's not fair to all the teams. And also the other thing I would factor in is that Notre Dame had some bad losses with Bonzi Colson in there and Matt Farrell. Like, this wasn't like, was Notre Dame a better team with those guys? Yes, they were. But were they astronomically better? There's no evidence to suggest it other than in theory. And so, like, this is why I don't like it. Like, if, for example, like with Duke earlier this year, Marvin Bagley missed a few games. Is Duke better with Marvin Bagley? Of course they are. But Duke didn't suffer massively with Marvin Bagley being out. They won all their games with Bagley out. Like, it wasn't a big deal. So honestly, Duke winning those games with Bagley out didn't help or hurt them. Like, it wouldn't have mattered essentially by the logic of saying, oh, we have to factor in injuries. It's like you're giving teams passes for the games that they lose, and then if they win, it's like the same thing as if they lost. Like, it just makes no sense to me that we give passes for injuries or suspensions or anything. None of it makes sense to me. I just think it should be simply about what you've actually done on the court and what you've shown. And if you have injuries, that sucks, but you have to deal with it. And so I don't think I really disliked, even though Notre Dame didn't end up making it and it's a moot point. If they had gone in, that would have just been absolutely disastrous, and that would have been a huge issue because there have been a lot of teams for mid-majors or lesser Power 5 programs that were less brand name programs that would have been complaining about that one big time. So, and then as far as the whole St. Mary's and Middle Tennessee thing, this is where I'm going to shift into like, this is how I would more do the bracketing thing. I don't like these power teams getting in with so many losses. It's too many. Like I am all for, there are teams like Florida and Texas A&M that were, that they were at least like Texas A&M maybe a little bit of a different story, but like I'm fine with teams getting with like 12, 13 losses when they have a ton of like quad 1 wins and they clearly are the best team and they have like a couple bad losses. Like that's okay in my opinion, but when we're letting in some of these mediocre resumes like Syracuse over the likes of St. Mary's and Middle Tennessee, it just doesn't make any sense. Like Syracuse is one of the most who no one thought, very few people thought Syracuse should be in. They're like not like an inspiring pick here in this slightly. And St. Mary's, while I understand they didn't schedule well at all, St. Mary's in KenPom is 28th. They were clearly a top team that deserved to be in. They won at Gonzaga, and they had a couple bad losses. And so I do think that while, yes, you should be rewarded for beating top teams, and there should be something about who you beat and type of thing. I'm all for that. It's just shifted way too much in that direction. And we have to give a little bit more love to the mid-majors because the amount of mid-majors making the NCAA tournament has significantly declined over the last 10 to 15 years. Part of that is because of conference realignment and some of these schools like Butler and Wichita State, they're going more to power programs. But it's just stupid when, like, Wichita State, they are getting a 4 seed when they have as good of a team this year as they've had, or even not even as good of a team as they've had the last couple of years. And they're just, and when they were seeded, like, they got seeded 6th in the past, they got seeded 8th in the past, they were 7th last year, I think it was. And now they're getting a 4 seed for having the same type of quality team, or maybe even slightly worse than years past Wichita State teams with like Fred VanVleet and everything like that, and Ron Baker. And now they're getting a 4 seed just because they're playing in the American. Like, that's just wrong. Like, that should not be it shouldn't be that drastic. Again, it's fine to weight some of it that way. It's just too much. So I feel for Middle Tennessee and St. Mary's, I would have included both of them instead of like Syracuse and probably maybe like, I don't know, Syracuse is my biggest gripe, honestly. Maybe like Arizona State, that would have been fine. Fine in my opinion. And so my voice is running out. And so I was going to go on to a couple other things, but my voice is completely shot. And so anyways, I got to wrap this up. The only thing I'll just say is how I would fix the bracketing process in the future is if you're going to go the committee route, do not have ADs. Do not have current ADs or former ADs. There is and it's all behind closed doors. The first things first, I'll just say this now. We have to stop pretending that these ADs watch all the games throughout the entire year. They're athletic directors at their schools. They are fundraising. They're talking to donors. They're doing all the the schmoozing and trying to bring money to their schools to fundraise, to raise their schools' prestige, and because that is their number one responsibility. And they also do that by favoring their own conference in whatever way, shape, or form. There is a lot of politicking, I am sure, that goes behind closed doors. There is politics behind every single thing, whether it's in the political world or the business world. Like crap happens behind closed doors. And so I don't know why we should be trusting athletic directors, especially with the way we see athletic directors and school presidents handling things in the way of just standard legal matters. Why should we be trusting them behind closed doors when it comes to seeding things and allowing teams in? And so I feel like mid-majors are getting too shut out of the process here, and there's too much politicking probably behind closed doors. I will just give you one side of example so I don't sound like I'm talking out of my ass here. I went to school at Bowling Green. And I worked in the athletics department a little bit. Not that I have like a ton of inside information, but the NCAA tournament for the NCAA women's tournament that year, one of the sites that year was at Bowling Green. My senior year there, when I was working in the athletics department, I was just an intern, doing a practicum type of thing. And so, but I got to work at the NCAA tournament. It was a lot of fun and everything. But we were also, not only was Bowling Green one of the host schools for a couple of the games, there was also the point that the Bowling Green athletic director was the chairman of the committee. He was the head chair of the committee, and so it was interesting in that that you had those two things kind of going hand in hand. And normally you think of that like that's not that big of a deal. So Bowling Green had just built a new arena, the Stroh Center, and it was in its first year. Yeah, it would have been in its first year in existence, and this is why part of the reason why they got to host the event. And Bowling Green, actually, if you don't know, for whatever reason, usually has pretty good women's basketball. They've been down a little bit the last few years, but traditionally they've had really good women's basketball. Head coach Kurt Miller there at the time, he had built up the program, and he went on to coach in the WNBA, and so they got this, and the athletic director was the head chairman of the committee. And so, long story short, Bowling Green was not in the tournament, and so they were going to bring in some teams from outside, obviously. And if you don't know how the women's tournament works, you can actually have the host schools have their own teams play there if they're in the NCAA tournament, unlike the men's tournament. And they only have... They only host 2 first-round games and 1 second-round game, unlike the men where they have 4 first-round games and 2 second-round games. So it's slightly different, but it's still kind of the same concept. Any case, so the closest school to Bowling Green, really, as far as who's in the NCAA tournament and who would bring fans, is Ohio State. It's just like a couple-hour drive from Bowling Green to Columbus. It might even be less than a couple hours. And so what ended up happening is Ohio State... according to like every bracketology out there, was going to be like a 4 or a 5 seed. Every just look at the resume and the quality of their team, they looked like a 4 and 5 seed. Like it was a no-brainer. So we thought, okay, so if things fall right, like they'll probably have Bowling Green be the host school for Ohio State, and they have some other teams come in as a 4-13, 5-12 pocket. What ended up happening was when the bracket came out, and I was on my radio doing a radio show at the time. It came out, and Ohio State was an 8 seed and was grossly underseeded. And they were actually seeded in the same region as Baylor, who was the #1 overall seed. And that was Brittany Griner's last year at Baylor when they went on to win the national title. So not only did they just completely screw Ohio State, they paired them up with Baylor, and the running, and this is nothing but more than a running rumor, and I have no problem saying this, but the rumor around campus just amongst a lot of people is just that yeah, they screwed Ohio State to bring Baylor in to have the national exposure and attention to Bowling Green's campus because people were going to watch Baylor and everything like that, and they wanted to make sure that they got the fan base with Baylor coming in into the Stroh Center and packing the environment, making it look really good. With the athletic director being, the chairman of the committee. And look, I have no proof of that. I'm not going to pretend I have proof of it or anything like that. It's nothing more than a running rumor and everything like that. But so this is what happened, and the Ohio State head coach, he ripped the selection process and what happened there, and why they were an 8 seed, and it was a historically bad decision, and he was absolutely right on that on every step of the way. I was doing the quote taking for it in the media. It was just it got weird, and so in any case, I will just say this: there is politics played all across here in college basketball. We got to get rid of the athletic directors. I'm not saying that that's ever going to happen because God forbid they ever give up their power, because no school presidents and athletic directors ever give up their power in collegiate sports. But that to me is the biggest problem. It's not necessarily that we have committees, but who is on the committee. We have to get a third party, or we have to get college basketball media members. That would be anything like that would be a step above. The other thing I think you could do is come up with a model that is much better than the RPI. I do think it should be more based on what you do, though, than just saying KenPom, because if you use predictive metrics, then you're taking some of the value of winning and losing out of the regular season, which I don't like. The regular season needs to mean something. You need to have wins and losses matter. So, Penn State, for example, Penn State's ranked 29th in KenPom. And they are clearly an NCAA tournament caliber team, but they're 336th in luck, and they have 13 losses. And outside of beating Ohio State 3 times actually this year, they didn't really beat anybody else, and they lost to some bad teams. And so I don't feel even though Penn State is an NCAA tournament caliber team, I actually don't think Penn State deserved to be in the tournament. So I'm not saying it should be a predictive metric, but it needs to be way better than RPI, because RPI is a garbage metric. So what I would do is, if you're not going to switch up the committee members, if you go the committee route, then just take the athletic directors out of it. Or what I would do is I would get rid of RPI completely and take something like KenPom, but remove the luck factor and put a higher premium on winning and losing, and factoring in all the other efficiency metrics and the ways you should be more predictive about evaluating teams. And so you make basically a results-based KenPom, if you will. I would say those would be one of the 2 best ways to go ahead and do it. So that is it. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Thanks for those who stuck around and heard me rant about this a little bit. Maybe you agree, disagree, whatever type of thing. But best of luck in your bracket pools. You can hit me up on Twitter. I'm at Nicky Skevich. Daily Fantasy Winners is on Twitter at DFantasyWinners. And thanks again to everybody for the subscriptions and likes. All right. Good luck, everyone.